We are looking through the life of Moses and what he's done. We've arrived at the, pretty much the end of our series today. And we're going to consider how the book of Leviticus is structured. We know you love it so well and have memorized most of it, I'm sure. It's such a delightful book to read. And so we're going to go through that. But to understand Leviticus, we need to understand where the Israelites were to worship. And that was the second half of the book of Exodus. And it was in a place, let's show it up, Mike, if we can, on the PowerPoint. I'm hoping that that's going to happen. And it was called a tabernacle, which simply means a tent. And the tabernacle was a temporary structure that they laid out like this. And you can see that the tabernacle itself is not like the sort of tent that you might go on holiday with. It is a sort of box-shaped structure with pillars placed on silver bases. And then around it was a big courtyard with a screen so that people couldn't come in unless they meant business with God. And this was the special place they were going to worship God and serve him. And it's important to understand just a few things about it. So what I've done, I've recreated the structure of our building into a tabernacle. I'll explain the bits as we go along and then explain some of the items of furniture. It should be quite easy. But if you looked at that white screen around there and imagine you're sitting in the middle of that tabernacle area, that courtyard, out there on the far side or about the middle of the road would be one stretch of the screen going that direction. And then where our community hall is on the wall, down all the way through to the car park, as far as the flats and the shops on the opposite side, that's the dimensions of that screen, the courtyard. Quite big. But if you then look inside itself, you'll see there's a couple of items of furniture outside it, which we will look at in just a second. Then you have to come inside the tabernacle. Now feel free, if you're children or whatever, because it's for you as much as anybody else, to stand up and have a look. You've got two big bollard sort of things, warning signs at the back. Can you see them? There's one there, and there should be one up behind that road there, just in front where Paul is pointing. That is the entrance to the tabernacle. And you can see it was quite a length. It was actually 45 feet long in old money, about, I don't know how many meters that is, plenty, 15 meters. And it was split into two. So if you can imagine that the height of this goes right up to that piece of, that wood at the top there. That's how tall it was. It was quite tall. And then you've got about 30 feet of it, or whatever that is, 9 meters or so. You've got that is what was called the holy place. And inside that space, because this is where it is, it would come from there to there. You've got three big items of furniture, which we're going to look at in a minute. And then beyond this, you can't see me, because there's a dirty big curtain up here, a really large curtain, and nobody was ever allowed inside that curtain except one man, the high priest. And when you come into that side of the curtain, you'll see what was in there. So I'm going to have to get my actors to help me understand and explain it, because what we're going to do before we get them up, we're going to look at how you get through this tabernacle and how you approach God. And the first thing you can see is a big square box, which is enormous, and that was an altar where they burnt offerings. I've got my altar here. It is somewhat smaller, as you can see, and for that I apologize. It would have been at least 3 times the size of that and a bit taller. But anyhow, that was a place where they would take a fresh animal, a lamb perhaps, or a cattle or whatever, and they would kill the animal by slitting its throat. Beside it, they would capture the blood and they would spread it around the side of this altar. And then they would burn the remains and the meat of the animal on top. They burned it up completely. And that was an offering to God. So the first thing you saw was this altar. What did that remind them of? That if anyone was to come into God's presence, they had to deal with sin. And the wages of sin is death. I don't want to die, but maybe this animal could be presented as someone or a person or a thing rather that had died on my behalf. And maybe God might accept that. So that was the altar. Once you go beyond the altar, though, you see there's another funny thing. It's actually a bowl, a very large bowl. I'm afraid mine is far too small. But the bowl would have been filled with water. It would have been about that size. And the priests would do that and use it so that they could wash themselves after having killed some of the sacrifices, but also they'd wash their hands and their feet, and they'd make sure that they'd washed their bodies before they dared go inside that tent. You see, as well as having a sacrifice for sin, you had to be clean to come into God's presence. And that, I think, will tell us a few lessons. Now, we'll discover later that Jesus is the one who gave his life for our sins. He was the lamb on the altar. He also cleanses us from our sins. And so the pictures that the Israelites were getting in that tabernacle was not to do with just the rules and rituals. No, it was all about Jesus. You see, they didn't quite capture that. They didn't know what it was going, but this was what it was pointing to. However, let's move on and let's find the next 3 items of furniture, because we're going to bring you from the outside inside the tabernacle itself. So we're coming across that threshold where there's a big screen. And can my 2 items of furniture please stand up and represent some of the furniture that's going on in here? That's you, Barry, yes, and Rod. Yeah, so Rod's on that side. Yeah, okay, this. And I'm fiddling around with something up here. Ignore me, ignore me, ignore me. Right. Okay, I'm going to do something that no Baptist is ever allowed to do in a Baptist church. I'm going to burn incense. So, no, we're not halfway to Rome, but here we go. Right, okay, there we go. If I set the building alight, blow it out, will you? Right. Yeah, I'll let that burn a little bit longer, and then we'll... Right, there were 3 items of furniture inside. Oh, I better show you as well. So we've seen the altar, the bronze altar that was on the outside, and we've seen what they call the basin, the bronze basin. But if you go inside the holy place, it would look something like this. You can see 3 items of furniture. On the left, as you come, you have got a candle stand with lamps. And there we have one burning away there, a nice cheery-looking lamp stand. And of course, that gives light because it would have been dark inside. But there was someone in the Bible that we heard of who declared, I am the light of the world. Who might that have been? Anybody? Take the children, yes? Sorry? Jesus, thank you, Eloise. Jesus, indeed, is the light of the world and reflected that. And over here, we've got a table. Can you see? It had 12 loaves of bread, 1 for each of the tribes of Israel, and Barry is doing a very good job of pretending he's a table. And can you tell me who said, I am the bread of life. He who eats of me shall never perish. Who said that? Jesus. So you see, all this symbolism and images, and the priests were the only people allowed in here, and they had to look after the candles, and they had to change the bread every week. Okay, I mentioned the incense. Oh, now it's smoking. How am I going to get that out? Anyhow, across here is a big screen. You can't get through that screen. But in front of it was a little altar where they burned incense. Now, this isn't making a lot of smoke. I can assure you, inside the tabernacle, they would have brought hot coals from the altar, and they would have put on frankincense and all sorts of things, and there's a big whoosh of smoke all over the place. The incense represents the prayers of God's people, but particularly the prayers of one who stands today on the throne of God at God's right hand and offers prayer for us. Who might that be? Jesus, I think we're getting the hint, aren't we? But the idea is that when this perfume was rising up the incense, the high priest once a year was allowed to go inside this bit where I preach from, the most holy place. And inside the most holy place, let's open it up, you see there was a golden box with some funny things on top called cherubim. Cherubim were pretty beautiful angelic figures. Can I have my two beautiful angelic figures to come up and help me and assist me? Because I haven't got an Ark of the Covenant here. But you'll have to imagine behind this, we've got this table. And this table is actually too tall. The Ark would have come about this height up on this table. It's about 2 feet. And then overlooking the Ark on each end, there was a gold lid. And on the gold lid were carved 2 cherubims. Can my cherubims close in? And the cherubims stared at the center of the Ark of the Covenant. And once a year, the high priest came and sprinkled blood on that. God, as it were, could talk to him direct. The most holy place, because God was there. Where do we find God that we can understand, who represents all the things that are in it? Let's take a look at what's inside the Ark. We've got the 10 Commandments. Who only obeyed all of the 10 Commandments and never broke them? Jesus. And there's a manna pot there to remind them that the bread of life walked with them. That was again Jesus. And Aaron's staff, which broke the Red Sea and all the other things the power of God represented. So this is what we see. Thank you very much, Cherubim. That's done a wonderful job. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for your... I hope you got the flavor of it. That what God was doing in the book of Leviticus, which many of us find rather challenging, was he was giving pictures in advance to the children of Israel that one day somebody special would come and fulfill all these things that not just give priests access to God, but gives us access